Some of you will remember this. Back in 1986, the NFL made a decision that would, for those of you who don't know, it's National Football League. That's what NFL stands for. They made a decision that would just change the way the game of football is played. They noticed that there were typically, in a course of a game, some significant calls that the refs made at, shocker, were not the right calls. So the refs, in the heat of the moment, in real time, they were doing the best they could, but the rest of us at home, we were watching that play over and over again on our TVs. We were getting different perspectives and angles, and we were watching it in slow motion. So the ref got it wrong, but we all knew what the right call was. And so they instituted what's called instant replay. And there are certain plays, certain times in the game where they will review a play that is in question. The refs will stop the game. They will watch video. There's somebody up in a video booth that goes through again and again, watching the same split-second moment to get the call right. They don't want one blown call to impact the entire game, and so they closely examine it. And then the ref comes out on the field and flips his mic on, and typically will say, after further review, right? After further review, the ruling on the field stands. We got it right. Or after further review, the ruling on the field has been overturned. And it changes some things. As we begin this new year, it is an appropriate time for us to do a little instant replay. For us to look back on 2018 and examine some significant moments, some critical decisions, some relationships, to look closely at the path we're on, to learn from that so that in 2019 we can say, hey, after further review, here are some things that need attention. After further review, here's what's not working, here's what is working. We want to be intentional with these critical moments of life. So this weekend we're starting a new series called After Further Review, and we're going to examine our lives through the lens of the longest recorded sermon of Jesus, the Sermon on the Mount. It's recorded for us in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 5 through 7. So you can go ahead and turn there in your Bibles to Matthew chapter 5. One way to title the Sermon on the Mount would be Jesus' vision for your life. Seems like a good way to start a new year. Jesus, what's your vision for my life? Or to stick with our football metaphor, God's game plan for your life. God, what is it that you want from me? And as we study this text, I think you'll find that God's gonna help you see some things from a different perspective. It's gonna help you look at some key areas of your life from a different angle. We'll slow some things down and examine who we are and how we're living through Jesus' vision for our life. And my prayer is that as we study this, that you'll say something like, hey, after further review, I've held on to some bitterness and anger in 2018 that's toxic, and I don't want to carry it into 2019, because in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is going to talk to us about the hatred in our hearts. Or maybe you'll say, after further review, I've developed a habit of filling my eyes and my heart with lust, and it has gotten out of control, and it is poison, it's destroying me, and it doesn't honor God, because Jesus is going to talk to us about lust and sexual sin. Or maybe you say, after further review, it's time for me to start being sacrificially generous with my money, because Jesus is going to talk to us about storing up for ourselves treasures in heaven instead of storing up for ourselves treasures here on earth. Or maybe you'll say, after further review, my prayer life needs some help. And Jesus is going to talk to us about how we talk to God and the priority of prayer in our lives. Or after further review, I've become judgmental. I have become critical of others. I don't think there's any sin that's more nauseating to God than spiritual pride. And we have to guard against it. Jesus is going to talk to us about that. Or maybe we say, after further review, I've been too anxious and too worried. I need to learn to trust God with each day, one day at a time, because in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus talks to us about that. And so as we go through this series the next number of weeks, my prayer is that we would look closely, that we would have the humility and the courage to examine our hearts and our lives and our relationships and our decisions through the lens of Jesus' vision for our lives. So in Matthew 5, by the time we get there, Jesus has already called his first disciples. He's already began teaching in the synagogue, and he's worked some miracles. And so it's no surprise then that large crowds have gathered and they've started to follow Jesus. And that's where we pick up in verse 1. It says, "Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up to a mountainside and he sat down." All right, so now we know why it's called Sermon on the Mount, because he preached it on a mountainside. He preached it up in the hills. But there's something significant that is being communicated here. It's more than just location. It's what happens in that location. See, Jesus is most likely going to preach this sermon in the hills above the Sea of Galilee. And this is an area where the revolutionaries of the day would hide out. And the people would come to them, and the revolutionaries would give their revolutionary message. It was a way to be safe from the Roman occupation. It was a way to be safe from the Jewish leaders. The revolutionaries would hide up in the hills with their revolutionary messages. So when Jesus is going to teach us here, he doesn't go to the synagogue. Instead, when he gives us his vision for our lives, he goes up into the hills. Because Jesus is a revolutionary, and his message is a revolutionary message. And his message is a threat to the Romans, and his message is a threat to the Jewish leaders. And make no mistake about it, this message is a threat to Americans. Like, there'll be some times as we study this where you're going to have to confront the fact that the vision Jesus has for you is a lot different than maybe the vision that this world has put in you. That God's dream for your life is different than the American dream for your life. And so in chapter 5, verse 1, he goes up into the mountainside and sits down. Verse 2 says, "And he began to teach them." As you go through the Gospels, Jesus is often called rabbi, which just means teacher. This is how they thought of him. This is the title they gave him. They would say rabbi, teacher. In those days, a rabbi was often the most educated person in the community, and it was the rabbi's job to explain the Torah, to explain scriptures, to interpret the scriptures for the people. There's a name for a rabbi's interpretation. It's called their yoke. Their yoke. A yoke, of course, is like it's a wooden halter that would go around the neck of an ox or a large animal as a way to guide them in the field. And so these rabbis would have their teaching would be their yoke. It would be what people would look to guide them and to give them direction. They would put on the yoke of the rabbi as a way to steer, direct their lives. But as you would guess, right, there are a lot of different rabbis, so a lot of different yokes, a lot of different interpretations, a lot of different applications. And the people would listen to the different rabbis, and then they would decide, okay, this rabbi, he makes some sense to me, and so I'm gonna wear that yoke. What's happening here in the Sermon on the Mount is Jesus is saying, here's my yoke, here's my yoke. It was different than any others, right? One of the phrases you'll hear in the Sermon on the Mount, it shows up 6 times, is the phrase where Jesus says, "You've heard it said," and then he says, "But I tell you." In other words, everybody else says this, but here's what I say. And so he makes a distinction between himself and how other rabbis would teach the Word of God. And maybe a question for us to wrestle with here even early on is what yoke is guiding you? What yoke are you wearing? In fact, if you're here and you're not a Christian and you don't really know about Jesus and you're not sure about the Bible and you don't even really want to be here, but it's New Year's resolution. So it's like church, gym, dentist. You're going to knock it out and you're going to start the year strong. And if that's you, I guess this is where I would ask you to start, is just maybe examine what yoke you're wearing. Who is giving direction to your life? Whose vision are you living out? You might say, well, no, it's just me. It's mine. No, we're all being influenced. We're all being impacted. We're all being discipled. Whether we intentionally choose it or not, we're all choosing a certain path. So what path are you on? What's guiding you? What's giving you direction? Maybe as you listen to the yoke that Jesus would have for you, maybe you would say, hey, after further review, the yoke that I've been wearing, it's not really working out for me. or after further review, the yoke of living to please my earthly father, it's just making me bitter and frustrated. I need a different motivation in life. Or the yoke of the American dream has left me feeling, comfortable but largely unfulfilled. What yoke do you put on? So the people are listening to the sermon, and that's what they're wrestling with as they listen to Jesus the rabbi. The Sermon on the Mount consists of 107 verses, and introducing this series and preparing us to go through this teaching of Jesus, I tried to identify what would be a theme verse, a key verse that we might underline or circle. Typically, you can do that, right? Like as you read a book of the Bible, or if there's a chapter or key section, you can usually find a thesis verse, a main idea verse. And so I read through it myself a few times and tried to land on one or two. I then did some commentary work to get the perspective of other people. What's a key verse here? Chapters 5 through 7. It helps us look at the rest of the message. And what I found is that really there's no widespread agreement on what that verse would be in the Sermon on the Mount. But I landed on one verse. One verse that I think is key to unlocking the other 106 verses. One verse that I think is key to unlocking more personally God's vision for your life. And it's the very first sentence of the sermon. It comes in chapter 5, verse 3. Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Jesus says, come here, I want to tell you the secret to unlocking my vision for your life. Do you want to be happy? Well, yeah. I think we all would say, yes, I want to be happy. I want to be blessed. Where do we start with that? All right, here it is. Blessed are the poor in spirit. And immediately that confronts a much different way that most of us have learned to think and live. You just take the very first words, blessed are the poor. Wait, what? Now some of you hear that and you're like, awesome, I'm broke. So this is good news of great joy. I don't have anything, so I'm blessed. Well, the truth is that for most of us in our culture, in our Western world, the yoke of our Western world is not blessed are the poor, it's blessed are the rich. And we intuitively do this. We connect the word blessed with being rich. We use those words, in fact, interchangeably. That's how close the connection is in the yoke of America. And so you go over to a rich person's house, it's a beautiful mansion. You walk in, you say, this house is incredible. The rich person doesn't say, thanks, yeah, I'm so rich. That would be inappropriate. The rich person says, thanks, I'm so blessed. It's because we connect blessing with wealth. Now, I want to be careful here because this isn't just speaking of, it's not necessarily about money when Jesus says, blessed are the poor in spirit. So blessed are the poor isn't necessarily about money, but it's not necessarily not about money. You read through the Gospels and it's hard to not conclude that those who are monetarily poor can have a spiritual head start in learning to trust God and be dependent on God. But there are two words in the Greek for the word poor. One word speaks primarily to a person's financial state. The other word is the word used here. And it goes beyond a monetary description. The word, in fact, translated poor here could also be translated as blessed are the powerless. Blessed are the helpless, blessed are the afflicted, the needy, blessed are the lacking. It's a deeper state of poverty than just financial. And so Jesus says, here's where my vision for you begins. Blessed are those who are powerless and helpless and needy. And who's in? That's a hard sell. It's a hard sell because when we think of our vision for our life, this is kind of the opposite of what we want. I think it's safe to say that most of us are pursuing a path that goes in the complete opposite direction of poor in spirit. We want people to think that we're rich in spirit, that we're strong enough and clever enough and creative enough and capable enough. I mean, that's the yoke of our world. Blessed are the rich in spirit. It's not blessed are the helpless, it's blessed are the capable. It's not blessed are the needy, it's blessed are those who don't need anything. It's blessed are the independent. I mean, there's no awards at athletic banquets for being poor in spirit. There might be these days, now that I think about it, but as far as I know, there's no official poor in spirit awards. There's no place on a resume for poor in spirit like this. No politician runs on the platform of poor in spirit. That's just not a thing, right? Like if you made New Year's resolutions, I'm guessing that not very many people said 2019, it's going to be the year of poor in spirit. That's what I'm going for. I'm going to become poor in spirit. And yet, this is where Jesus' vision for your life begins. And this is not something you can skip over. In fact, should you try to skip over being poor in spirit, then the rest of his vision for your life will become nothing but frustration. And so what's it mean? I mean, what's it look like to be poor in spirit? The way I want to frame this up is by saying, I think there are three things that someone who is poor in spirit will say every day of 2019. Three things that someone who's poor in spirit will say every day. One thing they'll say is, I can't. This is where it begins, is a humbling of yourself, a recognition of your need, a daily dependence saying, I can't. I can't. I can is like the polar opposite of the rich in spirit mantra. If you're reading any self-help books to start your new year, you know one of the constant themes of a self-help book would be positive self-talk. You say some things to yourself, about yourself, and certainly positive self-talk is not unbiblical. The Bible would teach this. It just needs to be based on God's truth about us, not a humanistic approach. And I was reading some different self-help books and gathering some examples of statements that they would encourage you to say on a regular basis. So here are a few of them I jotted down. You start off every day and you say, look in the mirror, you say, I am confident and I'm capable. You say, I'm strong enough. I have what it takes. My life is unfolding beautifully. Yeah, just keep telling yourself that. My life is unfolding beautifully. I'm deserving and worthy of every good thing. And so you tell yourself this again and again and again. And those who are poor in spirit would say, I'm not capable. I'm not strong enough. I don't have what it takes. I'm not worthy. I can't save myself. I can't redeem my mess. I can't change myself. I can't. Now, when you hear that, at first it might seem a little bit discouraging. Okay, great, we're all gonna walk out of here feeling very defeated and ready to quit. Well, hang on. This is just the first thing you say. I can't. It's where it begins. But it's especially hard for us to have this type of attitude of kind of this humble self-awareness when the yoke of our culture is keep up appearances at all costs. That look good, put on a good front. Don't let people really see the struggles. Airbrush as much as necessary. Maybe my favorite news story of 2018. I don't know if you saw this, but a family posted their family picture, where they had a professional photographer take their family picture and airbrush it, and just airbrushed it to death, right? Like, I don't know exactly what went through the photographer's mind, but the photographer starts to fix it and then tries to fix it a little bit more, and now the faces have to match, and it just ends up being some of you are gonna be visited by these people in your nightmares tonight. Like, it is disturbing. And so the wife, who I assume is this person, the wife posts these pictures online and had a great attitude about it and didn't mention the photographer's name or anything like that. In fact, wasn't even trying to get their money back, because they said they certainly got their money's worth in just the comical relief of it. And so this was their official family photograph for 2018. And yet, I mean, that's what a lot of us do, right? Well, you can take this off. I'm losing people here. It's what a lot of us do, though. We have our pictures, and it may not be to that extreme, but this is what we do. We put out this version of ourselves that isn't real, and then we feel like we have to live up to it, and so saying I can't, or expressing dependence or brokenness, we set ourselves up for a very difficult time of being honest. Yet the Bible tells us that when we humble ourselves, that's when we receive God's strength. When we intentionally humble ourselves, not when we're humbled. Jesus says in Luke 18, humble yourself and you will be exalted. And so this is key to the vision Jesus has for your life.